We rejoin our namers of the rose in the triumph of life many centuries later, long after these times, around the year 2165, as they visit the place where it all began, each of them about 162 years old. They are still very much together and have again found the complete happiness that was inspired by the advice of the Book of Quatrains and the many other books that they had written together.
He and she have now become I and she, for the story's narrator was, of course, also the participant. It was on the last day of Indian summer that I approached the side entrance of the nature reserve, the one near the old graveyard, for we felt that the cemetery was a place that was both for the living and the dead. As I left our cabin and walked through the streets, I was saddened, though in a pleasant way, when I saw the last flowers of autumn still trying to push up through and around the leaves that the fall had everywhere bestrewn. Sir. In one garden there was a sundial and an old man sitting silently next to it. In my mind I named him Care. The gentle old man nodded his assent as I looked to pick some flowers to bring to her, my holy partner, while Care slowly marked the hours by the shadows that crept over time's face. Angelina was not with me, for she liked to wait in the cemetery, resting up against a tombstone and reading or writing the time away until I arrived at our afternoon rendezvous. My steps therefore hurried on through and over the cemetery gate, now lying broken and rotting on the ground. Here the path rose up the hill where many had taken their last journey. Carrying my half of the supplies and sleeping gear, I walked up and up, my steps heavy and plodding at first, but then lightening and quickening with the thought of my angel waiting up there. I picked up the nature path behind the tombs, braving the briars, the poison ivy, and the wandering brush that often obscured the trail. I soon arrived among the tombstones, and there she was, as often as not, next to the empty grave of Jane Hamilton. We had always joked that perhaps Jane was now on the loose, but since then, Angelina had adopted Jane's last abode as her own, and was warming herself with the heat of the gravestone. Of course, had I not seen this scene before, I might have thought that here lies Jane, but I just smiled and kissed her awake, handing her the last flowers of the year. I soon arrived among the tombstones, and there she was, as often as not, next to the empty grave of Jane Hamilton. We had always joked that perhaps Jane was now on the loose, but since then Angelina had adopted Jane's last abode as her own, and was warming herself with the heat of the gravestone. Of course, had I not seen this scene before, I might have thought that here lies Jane, but I just smiled and kissed her awake, handing her the last flowers of the year. Leaves began to flutter down on us as the wind rustled the trees which probably weren't even here when the cemetery was last used. There seemed to be no dates on the tombstones later than the 1800s, say 1875 or so. So we were resting in a place that had perhaps been forgotten forever. Closing our eyes, we imagined the scene without the trees and the new growth as it probably once was, a clearing covered with leafy ground plants which alone had still persisted. In our minds we saw a meadow on a hill where the stones stood proud, where Victorian hearse carriages from the gaslight era lumbered up the hill with the dead, their mourning processions coming on behind. But now the gravestones leaned every which way, many of them cracked or in pieces, some even laying down flat and many others not readable, the scene being much overgrown and underswept. Well, little by little, each time we came here, we'd start clearing the brush and righting the stones, and so we did that for a while. We read some of the inscriptions engraved on the stones. The first, its dates denoting an infant's short smile of years, read, "It was so soon that I was done for, that's it's a wonder what I was begun for." Another said, apparently from beyond the grave, "My death is separate from life by just a breath." Another said with somewhat dry humor, "Please turn down your cup to my thirsty lips." Another, of a local writer, words resting in print, read, "Whither has flown the spirit from the dead, but rests here as the soul in all I've said." The last one showed a picture of a raised glass and said, "Take heavenly sups from your earthly cup and live your life while the wine flows red." We took this last one as a sign to move on, saving the other inscriptions for next time, being careful as we walked not to fall into any of the empty or sunken grave sites. We broke open a bottle of apple cider, gave each other a sip, and then, thinking back of Omar, poured a few drops of our precious drink into the ground. Refreshed, we wandered among the tombs, using some as stepping stones, and quickly ran on out of the back of the cemetery, where we soon lay asleep in the old caretaker's hut.
We dreamed of a world white in the moonlight, of a crystalline cathedral built from falling stars in the holy night. It was then that aged winter came, looked at us while we slept, and cried down his crystal tears on us. For our youth and beauty had made the old man mourn for summer's love, for the waving wheat and corn, and even more so for the late autumn mild who, withered, wan, had just now passed on, taking us both with him, leaving the earth a widow, weather-worn.